I've noticed that whenever we leave the house, Cooper is always up at the window watching. And I wondered, was he thinking? Maybe he's thinking, I wonder how long they'll be. I wonder will they come back? I wonder will they forget about me? I wonder are they ever coming back? But I'm sure he knows that of course we'll come back because we love him very much. But I find that every dog is the same. You see, as you drive off, if you turn and you look back, they're usually like Cooper, standing at the window, looking out, watching you leave, maybe thinking, I wonder how long they'll be. I wonder will they bring me back something nice. I hope they don't forget about me. And it doesn't matter whether it's Cooper or Mia or any other dog, they're always the same. They just want you back because they love you very much. And of course, we do come back because we love them very much as well, don't we, Cooper? And of course, one way that we show what we love our dogs is whenever we feed them. And of course, Cooper, he loves a nice piece of ham. Easy, easy, easy. Take it. That's a good boy. Whenever I thought about Cooper and how he watches us as we leave, and maybe he wonders, how long will they be? I wonder are they ever coming back? I thought about the boy in our story. In the last video we did, we heard of this young man called Joseph, and he had ended up in prison. And he was in prison for something he didn't do. Somebody had lied about him, and he'd been put into prison, and he was innocent. But even in prison, he had made up his mind that he was going to live to please God. And one day, a very important prisoner was brought into the prison. This was a butler to the then king who was called Pharaoh. And he was brought into prison. And Joseph had been given the responsibility to look after this very important prisoner. And one day he saw he was really sad. And he was sad because he had had a dream and he felt that there was no one in the prison to interpret this dream. But of course, Joseph was there and God was with Joseph. And God helped Joseph to interpret the dream. And he told the butler, in 3 days' time, you'll be taken out of the prison and you'll be taken back to the palace to serve Pharaoh again. But whenever you're taken back there, please remember me. Speak to Pharaoh for me. I've been put into prison and I haven't done anything wrong. Get me released. Now, of course, in 3 days' time, the butler was taken out of prison. He was put back into the palace again to serve Pharaoh. And of course, the butler forgot all about Joseph. And I can just imagine what it was like for Joseph back in the prison. And there he was, still serving, still choosing to do the right thing. But as time passed, he must have realized that butler has forgotten all about me. Joseph could have been tempted to think that his family had forgotten all about him, to think that this butler had forgotten all about him. But I wonder, was he ever tempted to think, wonder, has God ever forgotten about me? Well, I'm sure Joseph maybe didn't, because Joseph knew this. And what I want you to remember from this little talk is this, that our God rules over everyone, everything, everywhere. It didn't matter whether it was in a prison or whether it's in your home or in your school. I want you to remember, no matter what happens in life, that God is there and that our God, who is all powerful, rules over everyone, everything, everywhere. Even in the difficult times in our lives, God is still there. Joseph made up his mind that he was still going to serve God, but it was hard for him to wait. Joseph had to wait a further 2 years before something happened. And I wonder, was he ever tempted? I wonder, has God forgotten about me? Sometimes we can think like that. Maybe there's something that's come into your life, or maybe there's something happening to you, and you think to yourself, I wonder, does God know that these things are happening? I wonder, does God care? I wonder, has God forgotten about me? Well, I want you to remember that God doesn't forget. He knows everything, and he rules over everything, and he knows exactly what's happening in your life and in my life. And our God is a good God. In fact, he has already shown how much he loves us. He sent his son to die on the cross at Calvary to pay the price for your sin and mine, so that one day you can go to heaven to be with him forever. Remember, there's a lovely verse in the Bible, John 3:16, that tells us there, for God so loved the world, that's you, that he gave his only begotten son, that's the Lord Jesus, that if you believe in him and ask the Lord Jesus into your life, that you will have everlasting life. That's life with him in heaven forever. God doesn't forget. God's working things out in your life, even in the difficult days. There's a verse in the Bible, it's found in Psalm 135, verse 6, and it tells me there, whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and in earth. God is in control, but he wants you to trust him in the good days and the difficult days. God was working things out. Now, Joseph was still in prison, but Pharaoh, he was in control. He was the most important man, most powerful man in the world at that time. But God was going to speak to Pharaoh as well. The Bible tells me there's one night and Pharaoh went to bed, fell fast asleep, and then he had a dream, and this dream troubled him. And in his dream, he saw 7 big fat cows. They come up out of the river Nile, And as he watched, he stood in the riverbank, and as he watched, there were 7 other skinny cows come up out of the river Nile. And as he watched in his dream, the skinny cows went over and ate up all the fat cows. But even they ate up the fat cows, it didn't change them. They were still weak and skinny. Pharaoh woke up and he wondered, what did that dream mean? And then he fell asleep again and he dreamt another dream. And this time in his dream, there was 7 lovely fat ears of corn. And then as he watched, there were 7 sick, weak, skinny ears of corn. And again they ate up the fat ears of corn, but still they looked weak and skinny. Pharaoh woke up and he was really troubled about his dream. So whenever he got up and he called for his magicians and his astrologers, and he says, "Bring all my wise men." He said, "I've had a dream and I want to know what it means." And he told them the dream, but none of them could understand the dream. None of them could interpret the dream. Well, the butler, he was listening. And suddenly he remembered. And he came over to Pharaoh and he says, "I have remembered." He says, "Years ago," he says, "you were angry with your servants." And he says, "You put me in prison." He says, "While I was in prison, I had a dream. And there was no one I thought in the prison to interpret this dream. But there was a young man there, a Hebrew. He was from Israel. His name was Joseph. Joseph told me the meaning of the dream. He told me that in 3 days' time, that I'd be brought back into the palace to serve you again." And just as he said, the dream came true. Just as he interpreted it, that's exactly what happened. He said Joseph could interpret the dream. Well, whenever Pharaoh heard this, he said to the butler and to his servants, "Bring this man Joseph, bring this Hebrew, bring this young man out of prison and bring him to me." You see, he knew that what the butler had said had come true, and he knew that Joseph could interpret this dream as well. Well, Joseph was brought out of the prison. They went and they brought him out of prison, and he shaved and he dressed himself and he washed and he dressed himself, and he was brought before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said, "I have had a dream. I want to tell you the dream." Well, Joseph spoke and he said, "I can't tell you what the dream means, but there is a God in heaven and he can tell you what the dream means." Here was Joseph, just brought out of a prison, and he was standing in front of the most powerful man in the world at that time, and he was saying that he couldn't do what this man wanted, but that God could. Joseph was witnessing for his God, and he was putting God first again in his life, even in front of this most powerful man in the world, this Pharaoh. Pharaoh spoke, and he said, "In my dream, I saw 7 fat cows, and then 7 thin cows. And the 7 thin cows ate up the 7 fat cows, but they still looked weak and sickly. And then in another dream, I dreamt that there were 7 beautiful fat ears of corn, and then there's 7 sickly, weak-looking ears of corn. And they ate up the 7 fat ears of corn, but again, they really look weak and sick, even though they ate up the nice fat ones." Joseph thought for a moment or two. Then God gave him what these dreams meant. And he says, the 7 ears of corn and the 7 fat cows, that's 7 years. And there's going to be 7 years where God is going to bless the land of Egypt. And there's going to be so much food produced, more than anybody could ever need. He says, but then at the end of those 7 years, there's going to be another 7 years. God has shown Pharaoh what he's going to do. There's going to be a famine. And this famine is going to be so severe, there's going to be no food. And it's going to be so severe that everyone's going to forget about 7 good years. And then he turned to Pharaoh and he said, "Choose someone to have control over the land of Egypt, to gather up all the food in the 7 good years, so that there'll be some food for the 7 difficult years, for the 7 years of famine." Well, Pharaoh, he looked at Joseph and he said, "You have advised me to pick someone to gather up all the food, to be in control of all the land of Egypt." He says, "Well, you are the man." He says, "I have realized that God is with you." In the same way that Potiphar had realized that God's with Joseph, that the prison guard had realized that God's with Joseph, here now was the most powerful man in the world at that time realizing and saying, "God is with you. You are the man." And then he took a ring of his finger and he put it on Joseph's hand, put it on Joseph's finger. And this was a sign to say that he had all the authority now that Pharaoh had. And then he put some beautiful robes on his back and a beautiful gold chain around his neck. And he said, "Whenever I travel through the land of Egypt," he says, "you will ride in a chariot behind me." And he says, "As people bow to me, they will bow to you as well." Look what had happened. Joseph had been faithful to God while he had been in prison. He had done all the right things, he had made the right choices, and now here God was working things out. Young people, I want you to remember that even through the difficult times, God is still working. You keep trusting God no matter what happens, and God promises all things work together for good to them that love God. Remember, our God rules over everyone, everything, everywhere. Even this Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world at that time, God was speaking to him. And Joseph now was the second most powerful man in his kingdom. Our God rules over everything. Remember our verse, whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and on earth. God had remembered Joseph, but God had also remembered Joseph's family. You see, back in Israel, there was Joseph's family, his 11 brothers, and his father was back there. And just in the same way that the food had now ran out in Egypt because the famine had hit, the food ran out in Israel as well. And these 11 brothers had a choice to make. Where are we going to get food? Well, of course, the only place where there was any food now was Egypt. And they made up their minds, we will travel to Egypt and we will buy some food and bring it back here for our families. But they had no idea. They had no idea what they were going to find in Egypt. And they had no idea who now was ruling in Egypt. But they were going to find out. You see, even Joseph's brothers were going to learn this, that our God rules over everyone, everything, everywhere. And that God is working to a plan. And that God can work things out in their lives just in the same way he had worked things out in Joseph's life. So in our next video, we're going to find out what happened to the brothers whenever they arrived in Egypt and realized who was on the throne, who was in control. Thank you for listening.